Hi everyone. Today we're going to continue with our second portion of the Twits. We just finished hearing about how mean Mr. and Mrs. Twit have been to each other, all those pranks. And now that the shrinking and the stretching have all been taken care of, we're moving on. And today we're going to learn about the monkey cage and the monkeys that live at the Twits house. So the title of our first chapter for today is called The House, the Tree, and the Monkey Cage. But that's enough of that. We can't go on forever watching these two disgusting people doing disgusting things to each other. We must get ahead with the story. Here's a picture of Mr. and Mrs. Twit's house and garden. Some house, it looks like a prison, and not a window anywhere. Who wants windows, Mr. Twit had said when they were building it? Who wants every Tom, Rick, and Harry peeping in to see what you're doing? It didn't occur to Mr. Twit that windows were meant mainly for looking out of, not looking into. And what of this ghastly garden? Whoops. So here you can see, over here is their house. Not a single window. You can see another little tiny building next to it. That's Mr. Twit's work shed or workshop. We'll hear about that more later. The yucky garden, you'll notice here. There is the cage. And then we're also going to talk about this thing. We're going to meet that. See if you can figure out what its name is. It's supposed to be a tree. Let's see if we can figure out what that tree's name is. And what do you think of that ghastly garden? Mrs. Twit was the gardener. She was very good at growing thistles and stinging nettles. I always grow plenty of spiky thistles and plenty of stinging nettles, she used to say. They keep out nasty, nosy little children. Near the house, you can see Mr. Twit's work shed. To one side, there is the big dead tree. Did you figure out what that is? It never has any leaves on it because it's dead. And not far from the tree, you can see the monkey cage. There are 4 monkeys in it. They belong to Mr. Twit. You will hear more about them later. The next chapter is called Hug Tight, Sticky Glue. Once a week on Wednesdays, the Twits had bird pie for supper. Mr. Twit caught the birds, and Mrs. Twit cooked them. Mr. Twit was good at catching birds. On the day before Bird Pie Day, he would put the ladder up against the big dead tree and climb into the branches with a bucket of glue and a paintbrush. The glue he used was something called Hug Tight, and it was stickier than any other glue in the world. He would paint it along the tops of all the branches and then go away. As the sun went down, the birds would fly in from all around to roost and sleep in the tree for the night. What they didn't know, poor things, was that the branches were all smeared with horrible Hug Tight. The moment they landed on a branch, their feet stuck, and that was that. The next morning, which was Bird Pie Day, Mr. Twit would climb the ladder again and grab all the wretched birds that were stuck in the tree. It didn't matter what kind they were, song thrushes, blackbirds, sparrows, crows, little Jenny wrens, robins, anything. They all went into the pot for Wednesday's bird pie supper. There it is. Yummy. I love having bird feet stick out of my pies. Not. Well, the next chapter is called 4 Sticky Little Boys. One Tuesday evening, after Mr. Twit had been up the ladder and smeared the tree with Hug Tight, 4 little boys crept into the garden to look at the monkeys. They didn't care about the thistles and stinging nettles, not when there were monkeys to look at. After a while, they got tired of looking at the monkeys, so they explored further into the garden and found the ladder leaning against the big dead tree. They decided to climb it just for fun. There's nothing wrong with that. The next morning, when Mr. Twit went out to collect the birds, he found 4 miserable little boys sitting in the tree, stuck as tight as they could be, to the seat of their pants, to the branches. There were no birds because the presence of the boys had scared all the birds away. Mr. Twit was furious. "As there are no birds for my pie tonight," he shouted, "then it'll have to be boys instead." He started to climb the ladder. "Boy pie might be better than bird pie," he went on, grinning horribly. "More meat and not so many tiny bones." The boys were terrified. "He's going to boil us," cried one of them. "He'll stew us alive," said the second one. "He'll cook us chance, cried the third. But the fourth boy, who had more sense than the others, whispered, Listen, I just had an idea. We're only stuck by the seat of our pants. So, quick, unbutton your pants and slip out of them and fall to the ground. Mr. Twit had reached the top of the ladder and was just about to make a grab for the nearest boy when they all suddenly tumbled out of the tree and ran home with their naked bottoms winking in the sun. Why they don't have underwear on, I will never know. But there they went home. I wonder what their mothers thought when they got there. The next chapter is called The Great Upside-Down Monkey Circus. Now for the monkeys. The 4 monkeys in the cage in the garden were all one family. They were Mugglewump and his wife and their 2 small children. But what on earth were Mr. and Mrs. Twit doing with monkeys in their garden? Well, in the old days, they had both worked in a circus as monkey trainers. They used to teach monkeys to do tricks and to dress up in human clothes and to smoke pipes and all the rest of that nonsense. Today, although they were retired, Mr. Twit still wanted to train monkeys. It was his dream that one day he would have his own first great upside-down monkey circus in the world. Now that meant that the monkeys had to do everything upside down. They had to dance upside down on their hands with their feet in the air. They had to play football upside down. They had to balance one on top of the other upside down, with Mugglewump at the bottom and the smallest baby monkey at the top. They even had to eat and drink upside down, and that was not an easy thing to do because the food and water had to go up your throat instead of going down. In fact, it was almost impossible, but the monkeys simply had to do it, otherwise they got nothing. And all this sounds pretty silly to you and me. It sounded pretty silly to the monkeys too. They absolutely hated having to do all this upside down nonsense day after day. It made them giddy, standing on their heads for hours and hours on end. Sometimes the 2 small monkey children would faint with so much blood going to their heads. But Mr. Twit didn't care about that. He kept them practicing for 6 hours every day, as if they didn't do what they were told, Mrs. Twit would soon come running with her beastly stick, and you know what she likes to do with that. But then the next chapter is called The Roly-Poly Bird to the Rescue. And I love that there's the word rescue in this next chapter because I certainly hope it's about the monkeys getting rescued. I don't think the Twits need to be rescued. Mugglewump and his family longed to escape from the cage in Mr. Twit's garden and to go back to the African jungle where they came from. They hated Mr. and Mrs. Twit for making their lives so miserable. They also hated them for what they did to the birds every Tuesday and Wednesday. Fly away, birds, they used to shout, jumping about in the cage, waving their arms. Don't sit on that big dead tree. It's just been smeared all over with sticky glue. Go and sit somewhere else. But these were English birds, and they couldn't understand the weird African language the monkeys spoke. So they took no notice, and they just went on using the big dead tree and getting caught for Mrs. Twit's bird pie. But then one day, a truly magnificent bird flew down out of the sky and landed on the monkey cage. Good heavens, cried all the monkeys together. It's the roly-poly bird. What on earth are you doing here in England, roly-poly bird? Now, like the monkeys, the roly-poly bird came from Africa, so he spoke the same language as they did. I've come for a holiday, said the roly-poly bird. I like to travel. He fluffed his marvelous colored feathers and looked down rather grandly at the monkeys. For most monkeys, or for most people, he went on, flying away on holiday is very expensive, but I can fly anywhere in the world for nothing. Do you know how to talk to these English birds? Mugglewump asked him. Of course I do, said the roly-poly bird. It's no good going to a country and not knowing the language. Then we must hurry, said Mugglewump. Today is Tuesday, and over there you can already see the revolting Mr. Twit up the ladder painting sticky glue on all the branches of the big dead tree. This evening when the birds come in to roost, you must warn them not to perch in that tree, or they will be made into bird pie. That evening, the roly-poly bird flew around and around the big dead tree, singing out, "There's sticky stuff all over the tree. If you land on the branches, you'll never get free. So fly away, stay up high, or you'll finish tomorrow in a hot bird pie." It's a scary song. Well, the next chapter is called No Bird Pie for Mr. Twit. The next morning, when Mr. Twit came out with his huge basket to snatch all the birds from the big dead tree, there wasn't a single one on it. They were all sitting on top of the monkey cage. The roly-poly bird was there as well, and Muggle-Wump and his family were inside the cage, and the whole lot of them were laughing at Mr. Twit. Uh-oh. Well, the next chapter is called Still No Bird Pie for Mr. Twit. Now, Mr. Twit wasn't going to wait another week for his bird pie supper because he loved bird pie. It was his favorite meal. So that same day, he went after the birds again. This time, he smeared all the top bars of the monkey cage with sticky glue, as well as the branches of the big dead tree. "Now I'll get you," he said, "whichever one you sit on." The monkeys crouched inside the cage watching all this. And later on, when the roly-poly bird came swooping in for an evening chat, they shouted out, "Don't land on the cage, roly-poly bird. It's covered with sticky glue. So is the tree." And that evening, as the sun went down and all the birds came in again to roost, the roly-poly bird flew around and around the monkey cage and the big dead tree, singing out his warning. "There's sticky stuff now on the cage and the tree. If you land on either, you'll never get free. So fly away, stay up high, or you'll finish tomorrow in a hot bird pie." Do you think it worked? I wonder if it worked. Well, I'll tell you this much. Here is a picture of the roly-poly bird. And if you notice, the name of the next chapter is Mr. and Mrs. Twit Go Off to Buy Guns. I'm going to stop there. But I wonder, why would they need to go buy guns? Did the hug-tight glue not work? What is Mr. Twit? How is he going to use the guns? Is it going to be the monkeys? Well, you'll have to wait and see. I'll see you next time.